Hello, hello, hello. I'm sitting here in my grandmother's absolutely lovely garden, and I've chosen this location for a very good reason. A reason I'll get back to in just a minute. You see, my last 4 or 5 videos have been a little bit doomer. I've been talking about the demographic apocalypse, the collapse of society, the various fake right imposters, people who don't serve the interests of our nation, the British or the English, but instead the tribes of Israel. I've also been starting my videos with lines like, England is dying, or Britain is dying. However, this isn't really a true reflection of my views. Of course, we do have many things that are going wrong for us. The demographics are awful, the economy's going to shit, things really aren't going well, and I'm sure if I was to walk into town now, I'd see, the modern UK as it is, for all its decaying state, and, things wouldn't be good. They're not as good as I remember when I was younger, at the very least. But the reason I chose to film here is that, England is still alive and well, and you can see it. You go to places, you go to lovely villages, you see it. And, I've been involved in basket weaving for a while now, and on the many weaves I go there, I see England, the authentic England. It's still there, the heart is still pumping, the blood is still in the veins. England is not dead, England is not gone. And so the purpose of this video is to say that there will always be an England. But what exactly do I mean by this? Well, of course, all our troubles are still real, and I'm not trying to escape from them or say that they aren't, valid concerns. We're still run by an elite that works against us and instead works for a foreign nation, a parasitic nation, a certain Middle Eastern nation, which I'm sure you all know. And, we should rightfully be concerned about things. Things are still getting worse in this country. It's still difficult for young men to find jobs, get on the housing market, find girlfriends, whatever. And all these problems are still real, but the point is that we needn't give up the fight. The struggle will still go on and we'll still be here. I shan't get too bogged down with political theory because, frankly, I know that most people aren't interested in it, and I don't need to turn this into an academic discussion. I of course do recommend that people go away and read the theory, or if not, read around the theory. There are plenty of books that summarise various different political concepts into very digestible and useful, little chapters. And this theory is very useful in understanding the world around us and understanding what we can do, what we're able to do, trying to detach ourselves from the very understandable desire for activism, the desire that we must cause change, we must make things better, we have a part to play, and that if we give up, then, we're letting our country go to the wasteland. But when you learn about the theory, you realise, well, there is only so much you can do. There is only, things don't work in the way we're told. We're not a bottom-up, grassroots protest. None of that works. None of that's ever really worked. It's all top-down, elite-backed. You need to have true power and be led by or be part of an elite organised minority. Now, part of the reason why I confidently say that there will always be in England is, well, I suppose I have to take a look at 1 or 2 of my older videos. You see, these 2 videos on screen talk about what I believe drive right-wing politics. Essentially, it boils down to genetic imperialism or Darwinian praxis, the spreading of one's own genes and those whose genes are closer to one's own. First according to yourself, then your family, then your clan, then your nation, then your sub-race. In this case, Anglo-Saxons come under the Germanic sub-race, then your race as a whole, then all of humanity, and then so on and so forth. Essentially according to the moral circle. I made plenty of videos talking about this, do please watch them later. But yes, what's important to take away is that the driving force of right-wing politics is essentially Darwin. It's the propagation of our genetics. And in a Darwinian sense, there's only one measure of success, and that is survival. If you are alive and you succeed in creating the next generation, who then in turn succeed in creating their next generation, that is success. So by that measure, we're still around. Purely by the fact that we are still around, that we are still here, we're still in the fight. Things can still go on. We're still in the Darwinian struggle for survival. We've not been exterminated. England is still our England. We are still close to 3/4 of this country in terms of population, and I don't foresee us being ethnically replaced. Not totally. Things have got a lot worse, and one has to acknowledge that, but we're still here, and that's my point. Now, of course, some nations in history do expire, famously Carthago de Landa Est, and plenty of others do get moved out of their homelands or pushed into very small pockets of the world, thinking of the Celts here. But the English and the English diaspora, we're still pretty populous. We still number above 100 million, I believe. So we're by no means out for the count, and I don't think we're going away. I mean, I've talked about in the Conservative Given the fact that you need competent white men to do these jobs because your cheap imports won't have the... Well, most of them don't have the skill, but then the rest who would have the skill don't have the incentives. Only native English people, or whatever it is in whichever country, will fill these roles. So in that sense, you can't get rid of us. But also in the broader sense, realistically, you're not going to get rid of the 45 million or so English people there are left here. And then when I talk about things like the apocalypse, the societal collapse from an over-reliance on technology, yes, many people will die in this, but provided that it doesn't just happen in this nation, provided that it's a global phenomenon, or at least to the extent that no one would be able to invade and subjugate us, then yes, many would die, but it would be an incredibly eugenic event. Only the fittest, the strongest, the smartest, and if you're a woman, the most beautiful, will survive such an event. But in this Darwinian sense, we will still have survived as a nation. We will still be here. We're not out for the count. We're still living and breathing. And who's to say whether this apocalypse happens or not? It might go that way, it might just go the way of continued decline, but whatever the case, unless the last Englishman genuinely dies off and there's no more breeding couples of the English, then, we'll still be around. We'll still be here. We'll still be living and breathing. In a Darwinian sense, that's all you need to play the game. And, I mean, look, there have been plenty of cases throughout history where ethnicities, races, or whatever have been, very much battered down, and yet, they're still here, and some of them, in fact, made a massive comeback. If you think even of King Alfred, he was isolated on the island of Athelney for a while, until he was able to muster an army and then defeat the Vikings. If you were to look at him at that time, whilst he was on the island of Athelney, then you might reasonably make the conclusion that Alfred had already lost. You might declare that, the West has fallen, England has fallen to the Viking invaders. But, history saw that Alfred came back, and the nation of England was born thereafter. In any case, I don't think I need to ramble on too much more, but there is one last point that's worth making. Now, when of course I say that Darwinian success purely depends on being around, surviving to the next generation, well, I suppose there's really 2 points to make about that. The first is that, in keeping with the writings of Ed Dutton, genetically we are degrading. Without high infant mortality killing off the, genetic abnormalities, we are in a stage of genetic entropy. And that's just a curse of modernity. There are efforts that could be undertaken to stop this, but realistically, we'd probably fail in that unless we're, essentially trying to scientifically recreate a, biological struggle isn't likely to succeed. We'll probably get it wrong in many different places, and then, it won't turn out for the best. Probably better than it would otherwise, but not for the best. But then the other point is that if Darwinian success is purely a matter of survival and passing on your genes, you might therefore think that I'm saying that we should simply have as many children as we can. This actually isn't what I'm trying to say. I believe that if you have too many children that, essentially every person only has so many resources that they accumulate over their lives, and when you're having 5 or 6 children, you're probably spreading these resources far too thin. Now, someone like Elon Musk can afford to have, I don't know how many he's had at this point, but, in the teens of children, he can afford that because, he's, I believe, currently still the richest man on Earth. But the average person cannot afford to have so many children. And, in fact, it's probably better to only have 2 or 3 or even 1 child and put all the resources into that child's development, that child's growth, such that that child has the best chance in life to then pass on their own genes through someone else. It's not purely a matter of numbers, it's a matter of quality. In fact, I made a video on this called demographics are destiny, or are they? But yes, in any case, the point of this video was to set the record straight that, yes, although things can be a bit bleak, and although I can sound like a doomer at certain times, I'm actually not a doomer. I think that we could lose 99% of the population of this country, and yet still the 1% would live on. I'm not saying that in, the top 1% or whatever. I'm just saying a random 1%, whatever 1% it is, whatever fraction it is of this country, the English would still live on. For all the doom and gloom, for all the demographic problems, the cultural problems, this, that and the other, for all our elite shenanigans, the triple bracket and, the you-know-whos, for all of that, it's not over. There will always be an England whilst the English are still here. Things will never be over whilst the English still draw breath. Anyway, thank you for listening. Do please let me know what you thought. Other than that, this has been, a nice recording on a nice sunny day. So, anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Cheerio, bye-bye, ta-ta, see you later.